There are many strategies for achieving financial independence, just like there are many investing strategies, many budgeting strategies, and many debt payoff strategies. Today we're going to be talking about 5 of the most common ones and examining the pros and cons of each. Let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a link to the investing platform M1 Finance. Get started investing for free today. So before we get into the 5 strategies, let's first discuss why more than one strategy exists. Alternative strategies in finance exist to achieve one of 2 things. They either aim to work very well for a certain person or situation, or they aim to achieve one of the many sub-goals of these often much larger goals like financial independence very well. For instance, look at the debt snowball and debt avalanche. One has you pay off all your debts from smallest to largest balance, while the other has you pay off all your debts from highest to lowest interest rate. If followed, both strategies will achieve the larger goal of getting you out of debt, but they each have advantages over the other in some of the sub-goals of becoming debt-free. Obviously, the debt avalanche, if followed, will allow you to get out of debt as quickly as possible while paying the least amount of interest. The debt snowball won't always get you out of debt quite as fast, or with as little interest payments, but many studies do suggest that it increases the chances of someone finishing the job and getting completely out of debt. And if true, that could mean that the debt snowball, despite its interest-related downsides, could still be the objectively right answer for the right person. After all, if using the debt avalanche would be too much of a grind for someone to see it all the way through to the end, whereas the debt snowball would give them that momentum they need to get to the finish line, then only one of the strategies is going to achieve the goal of becoming debt-free for that specific person. I believe that a similar thing happens with financial independence. Except it might be even more important to consider the differences here than the differences between debt strategies or budgeting formats, because financial independence is a universal goal we all have. Barring the possibility of dying young, pretty much all of us will eventually need to have created enough passive income through businesses, side hustles, real estates, investments, or some other source to support us when we can no longer support ourselves. So just like the ultimate goal of every debt payoff strategy is to become debt-free, the ultimate goal of every savings, investing, and passive income strategy is eventually to achieve financial independence. With that in mind, let's get into the 5 strategies. The first strategy is traditional financial independence. And traditional financial independence is a way for you to determine whether or not you could reasonably expect your investments and other assets to cover your expenses regardless of whether or not you continued to work. It's most commonly measured using the 4% rule, which basically states that if your investments are worth at least 25 times your annual expenses, you are financially independent. Some have said that in today's environment, a 3% rule should be used instead of the more traditional 4% rule. And the 3% rule is essentially the same as the 4% rule, except that you're considered financially independent when your investments are valued at least 33 times your annual expenses. This is the most generic way to achieve financial independence. It doesn't necessarily do anything particularly well or poorly, it basically just gives you an idea of where you need to get to, and allows you to decide when you want to get there, and therefore tells you how much you're going to need to save in order to reach your goals. One thing that's often thrown into traditional financial independence is the idea of retiring early. This is where the FIRE acronym comes from, which stands for Financially Independent, Retired Early. While not a requirement of financial independence, it is brought up enough to warrant its own examination. And when it comes to traditional financial independence and early retirement, people usually fall into one of 2 camps: LEANFIRE and FATFIRE. LEANFIRE is when someone becomes financially independent and retires early on a lifestyle where they spend no more than $40,000 a year, and some live on quite a bit less than that. The biggest pro to LEANFIRE is the time required to achieve it. For example, let's take John and Jane. They're both 50 years old and haven't saved a dime for retirement. They need to kick their savings into gear, and they need to do it fast. Thankfully, they make good money, taking home $100,000 a year. They decide to both max out their 401ks and both max out their IRAs, as well as an HSA between the 2 of them. Since they're 50 years old, they're capable of contributing $26,000 to each of their 401ks, $7,000 to each of their IRAs, and currently $7,100 to their HSA. Once they turn 55, they'll actually be able to increase that contribution to the HSA to $8,100 thanks to the catch-up contribution rules. So that's a total of $73,100 per year today. and it'll increase to $74,100 a few years from now. But hypothetically, this would mean that they're living on just $26,900 a year and would need $672,500 to be considered financially independent. Assuming an 8% return on their investments, John and Jane would reach financial independence on their current lifestyle in just 6 years and 11 months. If they wanted to live on the maximum of $40,000 a year allowed by the LEANFIRE strategy, they would need to work and invest for about 9 years and 3 months. The biggest con, or potential con, to the LEANFIRE strategy is that it can lead to being overly stingy with money if you're not careful. But I'll come back to that idea a little later in the video. For now, let's move on. FATFIRE is similar to the LEANFIRE method in the sense that it focuses on getting you to retire early, but instead of living on no more than $40,000 a year, it aims to allow you to live on an upper middle class income in retirement. The amount that constitutes an upper middle class income is going to vary depending on where you are, of course, but the generic ballpark assumption that I see most often is an income of about $100,000 a year. This would mean that you would need investments valued at no less than $2.5 million based on the 4% rule to be financially independent. If we look back at John and Jane's example from before, this would mean that they would need to work and invest for at least 16 years and 6 months to reach financial independence. So obviously FATFIRE doesn't allow you to reach financial independence quite as quickly as LEANFIRE does, but it does have the added benefit of giving you a pretty healthy income once you do reach retirement. Its main potential con is the same as LEANFIRE's. If you're not careful, it can be tempting to become overly stingy with your money and neglect the things and the people that bring joy into your life. Which brings me to slow financial independence. Slow financial independence could be viewed as a response to the Lean and FATFIRE movements, which of course have gained a lot of traction over the past several years. Because, as I just said, one of the potential downsides of both Lean and FATFIRE is, in order to achieve them, you may find yourself cutting out quite a lot of your lifestyle. This is especially true if your income isn't at least above average, which makes having a side hustle incredibly important, mind you, to getting the most out of Lean and FATFIRE. But that's a whole nother kit and caboodle. Now, if you're saving that much money in a frugal way, where you're only completely cutting things that don't really add much value to your life while finding ways to enjoy the rest of your spending just in a much more financially efficient manner, then that's one thing. But if you're finding yourself becoming incredibly stingy with your money to get your savings rate where you want it to be, then you might find yourself regretting some of those decisions after you reach financial independence. There's a few reasons for this. First, there's more to a well-lived life than just an endless accumulation of dollars. Second, especially in this day and age with all the technology we have at our fingertips, you can have a surprising amount of freedom even without being totally financially independent. Third, in most cases, achieving financial independence on such a strict budget probably isn't going to make you all that much happier or healthier than you were before you achieved financial independence. That doesn't mean that financial independence isn't a goal worth pursuing, because it absolutely is. It just means that perhaps we should work on finding a balance between prioritizing the time it takes to reach financial independence and the amount of enjoyment we get out of the process of becoming financially independent. Slow financial independence aims to strike that balance. In John and Jane's case, that may mean they save and invest enough to max out each of their 401ks each year, but live on and enjoy the rest of their income. This would mean that they invest about $52,000 a year and spend the other $48,000. Given these numbers, we know that they would need about $1.2 million in their nest egg to be considered financially independent. And that would take them about 13 years and 5 months or so, using our previous assumptions. That's definitely a little longer than it took to achieve financial independence using the LEANFIRE strategy, and a bit shorter than it took for the FATFIRE strategy, which makes sense given that their income in retirement would be somewhere in between those two strategies. But the main pro to this strategy is the focus on enjoying the journey as much as possible instead of just the destination. And the con, of course, is it does take longer than some of the other strategies to reach financial independence. The next way to achieve financial independence is coasting financial independence. This is sometimes known as barista financial independence, but the basic idea is that you spend the next handful of years saving as aggressively as you can, similar to what we saw with the Lean and FATFIRE strategies, but then you pull your foot off the gas pedal for the rest of your working career while your investments grow to the point where they can cover your expenses by the time you decide to retire. So let's go back to John and Jane to see how this works. Let's say that John and Jane want to retire at 70 years old. So they have 20 years to accumulate the savings they need to support themselves in retirement. They want to be able to live on $50,000 a year once they reach retirement. This means that in 20 years, John and Jane need $1.25 million in their nest egg. Assuming they maxed out all their tax-advantaged accounts like they did in the LEANFIRE example, and managed an 8% average annualized rate of return, they would need to save aggressively for about 4 years and 4 months to reach their goal by the age of 70. This strategy can be particularly effective for those who are still fairly young. For example, to have $1.25 million in your nest egg when you turn 70, an 18-year-old would only need to save about $400 a month until they turn 24, assuming an 8% return during their working career. Now, there are a few things that are incredibly important to keep in mind if you're using coasting financial independence. The first is inflation. Since you're saving aggressively for a handful of years and then letting your investments grow on their own, possibly even for decades, it's important to make sure that your $50,000 a year income actually feels like a $50,000 a year income once you start withdrawing it. For instance, if we assume that inflation is 3% per year, when that 18-year-old turns 70 and retires, that $50,000 a year income that he's withdrawing might only buy him the equivalent of what $10,750 would buy him when he was 18. You can plan for this by using what's known as a real rate of return when making your assumptions. The real rate of return is just the stated rate of return minus inflation. Or you can continue saving a little bit each year after your aggressive savings period is over and done with, just to give yourself a little extra cushion. For instance, as of this writing, since 1980, Vanguard's S&P 500 Index Fund has earned about 10.5% per year, assuming you reinvested the dividends. Inflation since 1980, at least as measured by the CPI, has been a little bit under 3% per year, so the real rate of return of the index fund has been about 7.5% per year. Obviously, past returns do not indicate future returns, so it may not be a bad idea to give yourself that little extra cushion that I was mentioning in your estimates, but that's how coasting financial independence works. The biggest pro to this strategy is that it allows you to change careers possibly much earlier than any of the other strategies, which can be particularly attractive if you're in a high-paying but highly stressful job and don't mind working for a while at some other job. Another pro to this strategy is that it is, hands down, the most financially efficient way to achieve financial independence. In the examples we just used with John and Jane, they needed to save about $316,750 to achieve coasting financial independence, but they would have needed to save about $505,000 to reach LEANFIRE on a $26,900 a year lifestyle, or $676,000 to achieve LEANFIRE on the $40,000 a year lifestyle, $1.2 million to reach FATFIRE, and almost $700,000 to reach slow financial independence. In the hypothetical case of the 18-year-old's example, they technically would have only needed to invest about $27,300 of their own money to achieve coasting financial independence, thanks to the fact that they have so much time to let the money compound. And that's quite a big difference in terms of how much of your own money is being used to fund your future. The con to this strategy for financial independence is, of course, that it takes quite a while to achieve full financial independence, since you're only aggressively saving for a short period of time. So which strategy do you think would work best for you? Do you have any other strategies that you think I missed? Let me know in the comments section below. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.